Alright, in this video I wanted to talk more about the intricacies of class flow. So here we have a solid to liquid continuum, and I have 4 objects, and the idea is that a student will come up to the board and place the objects on this line, whether it's solid or liquid. And so they might be expected to place the rock on the solid end, the water on the liquid end, and some of these other items that are a little more squishy or wiggly in the middle. And I haven't programmed this yet, but it's almost ready to go. You can probably think of how you might create this site. You just find the pictures using this plus button over here. You find or add in the text using the text button, and then add in the line using the shapes. There's a line shape there. But the first thing I want to do before I allow students to interact with this, or the last thing I want to do, I should say, is to anchor these objects to the card so that they're not movable, because I don't want them moving the word solid or liquid or the line in between them. So that's under anchor, and that's just this little gear right here. Choose anchor, anchor all. That means everything's locked, they can't be moved. And then these objects down here, I can select multiple objects to anchor them all at once. And these ones I want anchored, but not their movement. I want their resize to be anchored, and I want their rotate to be anchored. So they can't be resized or rotated, but they should be able to be moved. So that's one thing to do when you've finished something like this. It's just a drag and drop activity. Now this one's a little bit different. This one, students are expected to put mammals inside the mammal bucket and reptiles inside the reptile bucket. And so you can see there are a variety of mammals and reptiles spread throughout the slide or the card, and they are required to put them in the right place. So again, I'm going to do some anchoring. Number one, I don't want these buckets or the text items on them to move. So I'm going to select those objects and choose anchor all. And it's a little hard to select them all with all of these different objects around, so I'm just going to go ahead and do each one at a time. And anchor them all so they can't move, and then I will anchor all of the animals. Oh, that won't work. I'm going to have to select these more individually as well, to anchor resize and anchor rotate so that they can't be resized or rotated. It's kind of like in Smart Notebook when you choose lock in place or lock object or allow move. That's kind of what I'm doing. It's just a different way of doing it. Another interesting fact is if you don't want to anchor every object, if you want every object on a card anchored, but you don't want to go through the whole process, you can choose anchor all components from card settings over here as well, which can be a nice way to do it, although these cards I don't want everything anchored completely, because I want some things to be able to move into the buckets. So the next step really is to program the buckets, and these buckets need to be programmed to accept certain objects and to reject other objects. So I go here and I choose actions for the bucket. And I'm going to choose an action type and choose drag and drop to container. Alright, so that's what I have here, and I'm going to choose what objects that bucket should contain. So I'm looking back at the bucket, I notice that it's the mammals bucket. So I'm going to select objects that it should contain that are mammals. So that's a mammal I see, and that's also a mammal over here. A whale and a dog are mammals, and I hit done selecting. So those are objects that this bucket will accept. And I want to play a sound maybe on success, maybe an alert sound. Although too many sounds might be kind of annoying. So, but anyway, you can kind of contain that and then save that. So that's a container bucket now. It will accept all those mammals. And then on the reptiles buckets, I'm going to do the same process, but with the reptiles. So I go to Actions, and I go to Drag and Drop to Container. And then I select the objects that this one should accept, including these three. And I hit done selecting. And then I also want to play a sound if it's correct, and save that one. So now I have the different objects, and they're ready to go as far as the containers go. So, and then I've got this solid liquid activity, and I also have this other activity that says underline the elements of the poem. Personification should be underlined with blue, and metaphor should be underlined with green. And I've got a few pages after that that I'll show. So now if I was ready to deliver this lesson in class, I would click on the deliver button, and this brings up the lesson. And then I could have a student come up. I can make this a little bit smaller so it's out of the way and move it around if I need to. And then I would have a student come up, and they would maybe drag these things around to tell me which ones are more liquid, which ones are more solid. That's the activity here. And go from there. And then I might have the next student come up and do the mammals to reptiles. Let's give this a practice and see if it works. So this is not in the right place, so it pops back to where it goes, but it is in the right place here. And it plays a little sound to show that it is right. Different than Smart Notebook is that this will it won't delete the object necessarily, it will just play a sound if it's in the right place. So in Smart Notebook, if you build something like this, the object itself actually goes away into the bucket. But in this case, it does not. So if I try to put the dog in the reptiles, it won't work. But if I try to put it in the mammals, it plays a sound. And the whale again. So that stays there. And it plays a sound telling the students that they got the answer right. And then finally, the last one, a student might be asked just to bring up a marker. And let's see. We're going to find personification. Maybe there isn't a lot of personification anyway. Maybe like the white curls from a gigantic beard. So they'd be asked to come up, use the marker right on the board. This would show up in the board in a web browser, which is a drawback, as I mentioned before, of the type of tool that we're using. And instead, I probably should have said instead of metaphor. Probably should have said simile, because there's a lot of simile in this poem. So students might think about like wool from a fleece as a simile. Anyway, those are the different activities that I've created. But really kind of the power of this is allowing your students to do this in a one-to-one situation too. If you have a one-to-one classroom, it's pretty awesome. So again, let me go back and re-deliver the lesson. So I'll hit deliver again, and then I need to go back. Hold on. I'm going to go back away from this lesson and then go back into it to make sure that those items reset, hopefully with the drag and drop. And deliver. Hopefully that resets it enough so that they're not on the board. I guess I'll have to just go ahead and reset them then. There's probably a reset option here somewhere. Reset view maybe. Anyway, that seems like it could be a useful item if it was something that could reset the objects back to where they go. I'll just put them back. Okay, but the power of ClassFlow, again, as I've mentioned before to you, is that you can add students into this class. So I can go to Open Class, and I can allow my students to join the class. And I'm going to join this class as a student as well. And hopefully it comes up okay. And as I have my students join, they're going to have to go to this address right here and join, and notice that there's a student in there. So as you have students go to this address, they can join in here. What's interesting about this too is that you can share this address. It stays the same for your class, So you can share that address once with students. Once they find the place there, they can save it on their computer and go back to that address as well. So I notice that I have my student in there and I'm ready to continue on. I can close this. I could also wait and see, if I have a whole class, make sure everyone gets on there before we continue. And then what's kind of cool is I can either push this screen to all students and hit send, and then if I pull up the student screen, this is the student screen on my iPad here. Notice that as a student I can go ahead and drag and drop the items on my iPad using my finger to where I think they should go, and do the activity myself. So that's cool. But I could also, instead of doing it that way, I could also, if I'm a teacher and I want to receive what my students have completed, I want to see what they've done, I can hit creative, and this allows the student to submit their work too. So I'm on my student computer right here. I'm dragging and dropping the items the way that I think they should go, and I can also hit submit down at the bottom, and when I submit that on the teacher's computer, it shows me what the student has done, and I can take a look at it and bring it up in front of the class and say, okay, looks like this one's right, or maybe there's some correction that needs to be done. So I can say, you did that wrong, you need to submit it again. So again, that feature is, let me go back to the slide here. So that feature is available through just hitting creative and going through that route. And then I could move on to the next card. And again, let's pretend these were out where they belong. Hopefully they go back to where they belong. It's because I went through this already that they aren't where they started. Anyway, I could have that happen again. I can go ahead and push to all students and they can do it. But if I want to receive the actual answers from every student, I can also instead choose creative. And once I hit creative on the student's side, they can go ahead and choose and do the activity. And they might get it wrong or they might get it right. And they can do it, and then they could submit it again to me using the submit button. Once they submitted it to me as a teacher, up on the board again, I see what they have done, and I say, oh, you're not finished. You've got some of the work not completed. So this is a nice addition that ClassFlow really gives us to be able to do this interaction. And again, I've talked about how, the one thing that students would like to do is interact. They like to come up with the board, but what do the rest of this class do, or class members do, when they are sitting down there watching the student do something? This gives everyone a chance to do something if they have a one-to-one device. And again, this one I could use the create, let me pause the last one, use the creative response and allow students to go ahead then and underline. And on the student computer, they have the opportunity to underline new parts of the project and submit that. So, and that will, again, whatever they submitted show up on the board. I can grade it then or take a look at and evaluate it. A couple other things to be aware of. I'm going to pause that one. You can have evaluation. So instead of the creative option, for instance, you could have, how this lesson, or this, I should get rid of how, this lesson was clear and informative. You could have a scale pop up, and you could have an agreement scale and start a poll. And then again, on the student computer, here's what it looks like. I can choose neutral, strongly disagree, agree, and submit my answer, and that will give the teacher an idea of how well the lesson went. And then also the last question on here is just, what could have made this lesson more clear? Excuse me, and for that one I could choose a word seed. And a word seed on the student's computer, there's a question and then enter your response here. So I could have students actually respond in that way too. They could say, talk more, I don't know, and then submit that. And when they submit that, it shows up here so that the teacher can see what suggestions they might have as well. And that could be used for evaluation, but it could also be just used for learning as part of a lesson. So some pretty cool features are available with ClassFlow as we talk about how to get students interacting when one student's up at the board. This combines interactive whiteboard activities with one-to-one activities for some pretty powerful learning opportunities.